This is the fourth video in our OS for Change Leaders series. In it, I'll introduce you to one of the most powerful frameworks in our OS for Change Leaders toolbox called the 7 Critical Conversations. In the previous video, I made the point that change leadership is the capacity to lead people in complex social systems like teams, businesses, and organizations on developmental journeys from where they are now towards better and inspiring future states. I'm going to build on that definition. What are those better and inspiring future states? And how will you and your team chart your course from where you are now in that direction? Last week alone, I applied this framework with 2 CEOs in different global organizations and with the superintendent of the school system in a very large metropolitan city, and also with the partners in an entrepreneurial startup, and with the CEO of a family-owned company. And in those meetings, we used it to tackle a broad range of business challenges, including entering new markets, drops in revenue, onboarding new leaders, stopping spiraling costs, and implementing a new organizational structure. And in every case, after about 90 minutes, participants were seeing new and inspiring ways of harnessing the people and systems around them that they hadn't considered before. Let me tell you about one of those meetings. I was on a video conference with a colleague and the CEO of a pharmaceutical company. After we completed our initial introductions, I set the stage for him. Would it be okay if I were to lead you through a process? It is one that we use every day. At the end, I promise you will have a clear plan forward. Sure, he said. So we got started. To begin, you talk, we listen, and take notes. When you are done, then we will play back what we've heard. Naturally, everything you say is confidential. Please be brutally honest. Stream of consciousness is okay. So the CEO passionately described his challenges, and when he was complete, we summarized. Here's what we heard. Yours is a second-generation, family-owned pharmaceutical company with around 300 workers. Overseas demand for your medicines was growing so quickly that you were having trouble producing enough. But then 6 months ago, revenue shrunk almost overnight by 40% because of trade sanctions. Since then, your company has been burning through cash, and your team has been caught in a wait-and-see pattern. However, you've decided this waiting has to stop. Your team needs to reduce costs while also expanding into different international markets. And it has to happen quickly. But there is tension, anger, and resistance to change on your team. And you were feeling stuck as a leader. The CEO nodded and said, yeah, that's accurate. Our next step will be to take the points you just made and put together a gap analysis and plan. The 7 critical conversations is the answer. It's how we're going to do it. They include purpose, focus, mindset, roles, interdependencies, strategies, and implementation. My assumptions are that you and your team are already pretty familiar with conversations 6 and 7, strategies and implementation, because that is where tangible results are created. But you are less familiar with conversations 1 through 5, because that is where the gaps and constraints to achieving tangible results tend to show up. I'd never thought about it that way, but yes, that's true. Just glancing at this list, I can begin to see where we are stuck, he said. I continued. Yeah, that's because the order of the 7 conversations reflects a natural law, which is culture eats strategy. To illustrate, critical conversations 1 through 5 are business culture, while critical conversations 4 through 7 are business model. Notice how 4 and 5 overlap? We call that overlap the system of roles. In practical terms, culture eats strategy means that you, as a leader, can push your team as hard as you want to implement a desired strategy or plan, but in the wrong culture, your efforts are doomed to fail. That makes some sense. I've been pushing my team. My efforts have fallen on deaf ears. I guess we have a culture issue, he said. Well, maybe. We'll know more as we go through the process. This is also a diagram of the law of the lid. which states that a business or organization can never sustain a level of higher performance than the mindset of top leadership. What does that say? Fair enough, it could be me, he said. Now, you really have my attention. Another key point. Those kinds of changes that are most disruptive are those that impact both business culture and business model at the same time. They are the ones that hit all 7 conversations, for example, restructuring, mergers, new leadership, and so on. So he said, this is like a storm rating system. My team and I are being hit with a category 7. I laughed. Exactly. Which leads me to my last point. Although disruptive changes are inevitable and might always be uncomfortable, if you develop your team's capacity for change leadership, suffering because of change is optional. So what is that capacity? How do you develop your team's capacity to lead change? How do you create a high-performing team? The answer is you and your team get really good at understanding your current states and desired future states for each of the 7 critical conversations. And then you focus like a laser on resolving the gaps. For example, imagine the current state of your team's mindset is concerned for our individual jobs and careers, while the desired future state is implementing as a team, working together with high degrees of shared accountability and trust. And the current state of your team's roles are missing those key roles required to focus on new international markets, while the desired future state is for every key issue and strategy to have a driver. Do you see how these 2 conversations, mindset and roles, are connected? What does this tell you? It tells you that you have to deal with the mindset issue first, so that you can then have a productive conversation around roles. And that is the process we are going to follow. Create a gap analysis for each of the 7 critical conversations, step back and consider the connections, and then create a plan forward. This process is how a team like yours can systematically create and repair a clear line of sight. The idea is that if your team drives all 7 critical conversations to resolution in the right order, success will become inevitable. That sounds pretty good, he said. So in this video, I've introduced you to the 7 critical conversations, and I began to show you how they can be applied. In the next video, I will dive into the first of these 7 critical conversations, purpose, picking up on the story about the CEO. Click on the button or the tab associated with this video to get a link to that next video. In that video, I look forward to showing you some tools for recognizing when your team is not aligned around a shared purpose, and for then getting them aligned.